I can still hear the words echoing in my mind, even now, months later. "You should be grateful, Michael." My father said that to me, looking me dead in the eye, as he signed the papers that legally stripped me of my family inheritance. A sum that was supposed to be in the millions, a legacy passed down for 3 generations, and handed me a check for $50,000 instead. $50,000. It sounds like a lot of money, and for most people it would be, but when you trade $50, zero, for what was conservatively estimated at over $2, 5 million, you realize the sickening reality of what just happened. I was robbed, plain and simple, and the thief was the one person I should have been able to trust in the entire world. The worst part, he genuinely seemed to believe he was doing me a favor, that he was teaching me some kind of valuable life lesson. I'm still reeling from the betrayal, and I had to fight back in a way that shook my entire family to its core. Tell me, honestly, after hearing the full story, was I wrong for taking absolutely everything away from him, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his own misguided arrogance? To really understand the scope of this disaster, I have to take you back to the beginning, to the life I was born into. My family's name, the Hollands, has always been synonymous with a specific kind of old money wealth, not flashy and ostentatious, but solid, secure, and generational. It all started with my great-grandfather, who built a successful regional manufacturing business. My grandfather inherited it, grew it, and then my father, Arthur Holland, took over in his late 20s. The cornerstone of the family's wealth wasn't the business itself, which was sold a few years ago for a tidy sum, but the assets, the land, the trust funds, the portfolios, all managed under a complex, iron-clad estate plan designed by my grandfather before he died. This plan stipulated that the bulk of the wealth was to be divided equally between his 2 children, my father, Arthur, and my Aunt Clara, with specific provisions ensuring the money would eventually pass down to their respective children, meaning me and my cousin, Sarah. My piece, the Michael Holland Trust, was set to mature fully on my 30th birthday, which was just around the corner. I grew up knowing I was privileged, but my parents, particularly my father, were obsessed with making sure I wasn't spoiled. They emphasized hard work, saving, and making my own way. And I did. I went to a good state university, not an Ivy League, and worked 2 jobs through college to pay for most of my expenses, graduating with minimal debt. I even went on to start my own moderately successful tech consulting firm. I didn't need the family money to survive, but it was always there, a solid foundation, a promise of financial freedom my ancestors had worked for. I was proud of what I built, but I was also looking forward to the stability the inheritance would provide, a chance to really expand my business without taking on risky loans. My relationship with my father was complicated. He was a man who believed in the tough love philosophy to an extreme. Nothing I ever did was quite good enough. A B+ was a failure to study harder. A successful business launch was merely getting lucky. This constant criticism, this needling sense of disappointment, was the backdrop of my entire life, but I tolerated it because deep down I loved him, and I believed his strictness was rooted in some twisted sense of paternal care. Then came the first major sign of trouble, my sister, Emily. She's 5 years younger than me, and while I followed the path of hard work, Emily took a different route. She was drawn to the arts, pursuing a career as a painter, a path my father publicly dismissed as a hobby that will never pay the bills. He cut her off financially the moment she graduated college and refused to give her any access to the small stipend she was supposed to receive from a secondary family trust, citing her lack of financial responsibility. She struggled, working odd jobs while trying to get her art noticed. I tried to help her out where I could, sending her money occasionally, but I couldn't fully compensate for what my father had blocked. It always bothered me that he had the power to override these things, even though the main trust for me was supposedly untouchable until I turned 30. The real shift began a year ago when my father started a new business venture. After selling the old manufacturing company, he got restless and decided to invest heavily in a high-risk real estate development project. It was outside his area of expertise, and all the financial advisors he consulted warned him against it. But my father, in his typical arrogant fashion, dismissed them all. He believed he knew better. He was always chasing that one big, final, triumphant success to prove he was still a titan of industry. Predictably, the project began to fail, bleeding money faster than anyone anticipated. He had already poured in most of his personal liquid assets, and he was getting desperate. I remember the day he called me into his office at the family home. The atmosphere was unusually tense. He paced for a few minutes before finally looking at me and stating, not asking, that he needed a significant amount of capital, fast, or he would lose everything he'd invested in the project. My first thought was, it's not my problem. But then he revealed his plan, the one that turned my blood cold. He needed to restructure the Michael Holland Trust. He explained that due to the way my grandfather had set up the estate, the only person with the legal authority to dissolve or alter my trust before my 30th birthday was the named executor, my father. His plan was to legally dissolve my future inheritance now, take out a significant loan against the assets to save his failing business, and in exchange he would give me a lump sum payment. I was incredulous. Dad, are you suggesting you're going to liquidate my future, the money that belongs to me, to bail out your reckless investment? I asked, my voice tight. He didn't even flinch. He walked over to his mahogany desk, pulled out a thick contract, and placed it in front of me. It's not liquidating, Michael. It's a temporary measure. Once my investment pays off, I will, of course, restore your full inheritance with interest. This contract ensures that, but you have to sign this release form today. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, looking for the catch. The catch was the payout, $50,000. He said he was giving me this amount now so I could invest it wisely, and that the rest would be restored in a couple of years. I pressed him on the actual amount he needed to borrow against the assets. He refused to give me a concrete number, but the panic in his eyes told me it was massive. It was then I realized he wasn't planning on restoring my inheritance. He was planning to gamble it all away. I refused, absolutely refused. I told him he had no right, that the money was meant for me, and future generations, not for his personal bailout. Our argument escalated into a screaming match, the kind we hadn't had since I was a teenager. He pulled out the ultimate weapon of the emotional manipulator, guilt. He accused me of being selfish, of lacking family loyalty, of watching my father, the man who raised me, go bankrupt out of spite. He used the classic line, "I gave you everything," conveniently forgetting that he was the one about to take everything away. The entire evening ended with me storming out of the house, promising him I would contest anything he tried to do. But my father is a relentless force when he sets his mind to something. He had the legal grounds to act as executor and dissolve the trust unilaterally before my birthday. He knew I was only weeks away from turning 30, so he had to move fast. He spent the next 3 days aggressively pushing the papers through. He called me every hour, sent lawyers to my office, and even got my mother to call and cry about how I was breaking my father's heart. Finally, I got a registered letter informing me that the Michael Holland Trust was officially dissolved. Enclosed was a check for $50,000 and a legal statement signed by my father that he had exchanged my interest in the trust for the provided sum, with the final, sickening sentence, "You should be grateful for this early opportunity to build your own wealth." I felt a cold, hard knot of rage settle in my chest. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had essentially stolen my birthright, not because he needed to feed his family, but because he needed to feed his monstrous ego and his terrible investment decisions. I was devastated, but I wasn't helpless. I was wronged, deeply and personally. My mind immediately went into overdrive, planning my response. I started researching my grandfather's estate plan with a fine-toothed comb, hiring my own set of lawyers, ones who specialized in complex trust law. I needed to know if there was any loophole, any forgotten clause, anything that could make him pay. And I found it. So that's the situation I was in. $50,000 in my hand, $2.5 million asterisk on asterisk, and the man responsible feeling self-righteous about his act of monumental betrayal. I had exhausted all the avenues of negotiation and appeal. He had played his hand, and now it was my turn. Before I tell you what happened next, how I went from being the victim of a heist to the architect of his financial ruin, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just taken the $50K and walked away to rebuild your life? Or would you have dug deep, used every legal resource you could find, and fought back to reclaim what was rightfully yours, even if it meant destroying your relationship with your own father? Seriously, take a moment. I'm eager to hear your thoughts. Okay, let me tell you about the forgotten clause. My grandfather was a shrewd man. When he created the initial estate plan, he knew my father, Arthur, had a tendency towards recklessness and hubris. To protect the rest of the family's assets, there was a specific, obscure clause, a fiduciary responsibility restoration covenant. It was called, which stated that any executor who unilaterally dissolved a descendant's major trust before its maturity date, using the assets for personal gain or for high-risk ventures, would immediately and irrevocably forfeit all their remaining interest and authority in the other family trusts and assets. My father's actions, in dissolving my trust and using the assets as collateral for his disastrous real estate scheme, perfectly triggered this clause. The consequence: he lost control of his own significant, untouched trust, which was meant to sustain him for the rest of his life, and he lost his role as executor of my Aunt Clara's estate and my sister Emily's small trust. All his forfeited interest and power were to be redistributed. The contract stipulated that it would be split equally between the other named beneficiaries who had not been disinherited: my Aunt Clara, my cousin Sarah, and most importantly, me and my sister, Emily. The immediate effect was devastating for him. The lawyers I hired moved with surgical precision. They presented the evidence: my father's signed dissolution of my trust, the corresponding loan documents proving the use of the assets for his failing real estate venture, and petitioned the estate court to immediately enforce the forfeiture clause. The court agreed. Within 2 weeks, my father's primary trust, which held the majority of the old, money-liquid assets he was still managing, was officially frozen and restructured. He lost his guaranteed quarterly dividends, his controlling interest in the remaining Holland family properties, and his ability to make any financial decisions for the estate. His reckless gamble had cost him his entire financial safety net. When he received the legal notice, he called me, not in rage, but in a cold, quiet panic. "What have you done, Michael?" he asked, the arrogance completely gone from his voice. I kept my tone level and calm. "I enforced the rules you broke, Dad. You taught me the value of hard work and that a contract is a contract. You signed the paperwork to steal my future, and I simply enforced the clause my grandfather put in place to protect the family from your exact kind of mistake." He tried to argue, to plead to guilt, trip me again, but I just repeated the facts. He had put his greed above his family, and he had paid the price. I hung up the phone. The aftermath was a hurricane. My mother was furious, blaming me for ruining my father. My Aunt Clara, however, was quietly supportive. She had always been skeptical of my father's business acumen, and she was grateful that her estate, and more importantly, her daughter Sarah's inheritance, was now safe from his reach. The biggest and most satisfying change was for Emily. The portion of the forfeited funds that came to her, combined with the power shift that put me, as the oldest remaining beneficiary, in a position of authority over the estate, meant that her small trust was immediately released. Not only that, but her share of my father's forfeited estate provided her with the capital she needed to finally pursue her art full-time, without the constant stress of juggling minimum wage jobs. She finally had the financial freedom I had been stripped of, and seeing the relief and joy on her face was worth more than my original inheritance. As for me, I didn't get the full $2, $5 million back immediately. My share of the forfeited trust assets, combined with the initial $50,000 payout, gave me a substantial sum, more than enough to expand my business and secure my future, but less than I was originally due. The difference, the amount my father had foolishly leveraged for his failed real estate scheme, was considered a loss to the estate. My father lost everything, his wealth, his position, and his reputation. He was forced to liquidate personal assets just to pay off the bank loans and keep the failing business afloat for a few more months before it finally collapsed. The irony is that in trying to teach me a lesson about being grateful for scraps, he taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes the only way to deal with betrayal is to be just as ruthless in your defense as the person who attacked you was in their offense. He had to learn the hard way that his actions had very real, very painful consequences, and that a contract, especially one drawn up by my meticulous grandfather, always has a loophole waiting for the one who breaks the rules. The dust is still settling, but I sleep soundly. I didn't steal from him. He forced my hand, and I simply played the game by the rules he created when he broke the family trust. I have enough to be comfortable. Emily is thriving, and the rest of the family's legacy is safe. My father is starting over, working a consulting job for a fraction of what he used to make, constantly complaining about my spiteful betrayal. But I look at him and only see the man who stripped his son's future for a foolish bet, and I feel no remorse. What I did was necessary, it was just, it was a reclaiming of power and a protection of my family. So, that's the whole story. I've laid out all the facts, the betrayal, the fight, and the fallout. I'm curious about where you stand now. Like this video if you were on my side, fighting to protect what was rightfully yours. Subscribe for more stories like this, where I dive deep into the messy, complicated realities of family and finance. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.